Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs here at Mercer University. And I would like to welcome you to this particular session on surviving your students' transition into college. I have to share this disclaimer. I come to you from the perspective of an administrator who has had a duty of care to students for nearly 21 years. I have worked in higher education for that amount of time, and I have been at 4 different institutions. And so while I have not been the parent of a child in college, I have been a mentor to numerous college students during my time in higher education. And my husband and I happen to be the aunt and the uncle to numerous nieces and nephews who are in college, and we happen to be the cool aunt and uncle, just so you know. That being said, we tend to be a resource to all of our brothers and sister-in-law's children when they are in college. And so I thank you for your time in choosing to come to this session this afternoon. And so we're going to dive right in because I know we only have about 30 minutes to do this. But I want to start off asking how many of you are first-timers for having your son or daughter in college? All right, okay, all right, got a few folks. And so my assumption is everyone else is the second time around or third maybe? Second. Okay, good deal. Well, let me tell you, those of you who have done it before, you probably have some insight that you can share during this time. And so we'll start out looking at asking you this question. What is your biggest fear? Your biggest fear. Let's start with the first time, folks. Let me just take one or two. First time, biggest fear.
Sure. That he'll lose his way in life.
Okay, that he'll lose his way in life.
Yes, his purpose.
Okay, lose his purpose, lose his way in life. Okay, other fears. We'll take one more. What about those of you who've done it before? What is your biggest fear?
We're happy that she's close to home, but still, she's interested in study abroad. So, going away, it might mean, things abroad, not just for a short time, but even a longer time.
Okay.
There's a lot of that I've noticed. When we visited Mercer to make our decision to come, it was, they really emphasized like outreach and missions, and not just in the local area, but overseas.
Yes, those are huge benefits to being in the life of our institution, is the opportunities that we provide students to experience life, not just here in the United States, but globally. And so that would be and is a legitimate fear. And just to say this, any fear you have is legitimate at this stage, regardless of whether it's your first time or whether it is your second time actually doing this. There's so many unknown factors. And so we're going to talk this afternoon just a little bit about some of those dynamics of what you face as parents and what you will face, and also some things that you may not want to do and some things that you're going to want to do or try to do in order to survive this experience. And so I'm going to reframe the discussion this afternoon to talk about surviving versus thriving. And so from my perspective, you can do better than survive this experience. I think that you can survive, you can do better than that by thriving through this college experience, even with all the unknowns and with all the fears that you're feeling inside. And school hasn't begun yet. And so the reality of actually being here just kind of sets in when you step on campus and you start seeing, all the things that are to be expected. And so I want to read this quote. It says, "My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style." And this is from Dr. Maya Angelou. And so when we start thinking about the term thriving means to prosper, to be fortunate, or successful, to grow, or develop vigorously. And this last word in here is flourish. Flourish. Can you all say flourish? Flourish. And so ultimately, what you want to happen for your son or daughter when they are here is for them to flourish. But alongside, because the focus is on you and your experience as parents, is you flourishing alongside them as you poured into them everything that you have wanted them to experience for 18 years or 17 or 18 years. You put everything you wanted to put in them. But when they come into our environment, they've signed up for a major, they're going to choose friends and relationships, and we're going to put everything into them that we want them to have in order for them to flourish, to be all that they are called to be in life. And so as a consequence, the journey is twofold. They'll be walking out their college journey, and you'll be walking out that journey alongside them. And as they grow, the goal is for you all to grow as well, because the dynamic in your relationship is going to change. And it's going to change a lot. They're going to gain a lot of freedom when they get here, and we're going to give it to them. And because we have rules and policies and procedures that will benefit them, and it's to also make them safe and to help them to be responsible individuals within our community. And so as a consequence, all of those things will be a factor in this journey of them, of you thriving and them going through the college experience. Some practical things, thinking about this experience. Dropping your teen off, obviously, for those of you who've done it before, it can be the most stressful, emotional, and illuminating experience of your life. It can be all of those things. And so we've seen stories of people circling the campus. They catch a glimpse of their student. They drop them off. They might even linger sometime to stay around because they're not quite ready to let them go. And then there are those who they do it and they walk away and they just rip the Band-Aid off and just set them free. All of those things actually happen in this experience. And so you'll get through this. You really will. We have, like I said, I've been doing this for 21 years. We hadn't lost a parent through this process. And so people make it through it, and they get through all the highs and all the lows. And so the first year isn't forever. It may feel like it, but the first year is not forever. And so you have all these conflicting emotions that you will go through. Those thoughts are about communication, what kinds of things. You can read everything under the sun about what it's going to look like and feel like for you as a first-time parent or as a second-time parent in a new college environment, sending your son or daughter off to college. And, you know, they might get homesick. All of those are real things, and you're going to miss them. And then some of those things will adjust as you flourish through this college experience. And so I want to share some things with you from a writer. There was an article printed in NBC News some years ago, and they talk about, it featured an article on the freshman year, and he wrote, "You'll survive dropping off your college." And then he had some tips for parents. And so we're going to look at some of those tips in our discussion. And we're going to share about what parents can do during this experience. Let me see if I can make this advance like that. There we go. So what parents can do. And so the first thing he talks about is parents can begin by redirecting their time and energy previously focused on that child. Now, this is a hard one because you've spent the better part of your years up until this moment running around with them for every activity, every exercise, every event. How many of you were involved in sports? You have some who were involved in sports, okay? How many of them had clubs or organizations that they were really active in? Okay, and that takes up the rest of the room. And so as a consequence, you've been there for all of those types of things. And so now, you know, this writer is suggesting that redirect that time and energy that previously focused on that child. And so then the second thing was ideally discussions about values which have occurred throughout the child's life serve as a foundation. This is really pivotal. And when you start thinking about values, Those are the things that you put into them. But one of the things that's really challenging sometimes that parents have to realize is that some of those values may be adjusted because they're going to be challenged in their thinking, and all the things you put into them. You know, they may have conversations that serve to even counter some of the things that you put into them. But the hope is that they're going to be so grounded enough in what you poured into them that those foundational things, they will not waver. But if they do, that's a part of the journey as well for them to grow and to develop as individuals. And so then the next thing is address individual needs. And each student has different needs. And so you may want to be able to investigate some of the resources that are here. Part of orientation gives you some of those tools anyway. But then if there are other things outside of this environment that you need to address, like the nearest pharmacy, where's the nearest Walmart, things that they may need, or if there's an emergency, do I know where the hospital is located? And so those are some of the things that you can do to help facilitate, you know, leaving them at a good place and knowing what their needs are. And then the next one is, in the event of a crisis, it is preferable to support the student's own coping and problem-solving abilities rather than rush in as savior. However, this is a difficult one, to hear cries of distress. Everything sounds magnified when you are far away. And even if you're not far away, if you're just not on campus and on the scene when it's taking place, it sounds all that much more worse. Would you all agree? And so here, though, you have to think about how does my child cope with things in life? And what does that look like? You have to be the judge of whether it's time for you to just stay and let them resolve it, or should you come to the rescue? Now, I'm going to give you a couple examples. Now, if they didn't make a good grade on the test, that's not a crisis. They need to study. And so that's not a moment where you pick up the phone and call the faculty or person and try to ask, you know, what happened on the test. Now, if you think I'm making that up, that does happen. That also being said, there are instances where it is a real emergency. Part of my job, I have responsibilities for crisis management issues on campus, and I also have responsibility for conduct issues on our campus. And so there are instances where there could be a real emergency. And I'm one of those individuals who serves in an on-call rotation with two other administrators, the vice president and another associate dean on campus. And sometimes we have to make those phone calls in the middle of the night. And if we do, most of the time we want parents to be able to come. That's an instance where you may need to actually come. But other times it may not be that bad because we have resources on campus, like Health Services Center, okay? And so the next one, I want you all to say this: guide rather than pressure. Can we all say that?
Guide rather than pressure.
Guide rather than pressure. This one's hard. It's real hard, and I'm not going to use my words for this one because in another life I used to do career counseling and development. And one of the things that I used to hear is, you know, parents wanting their child to be this or that. You fill in the blank. I want my child to be blah, blah, blah. And then I work one-on-one with students in counseling sessions who would say things like, I'm only doing this because my parents wanted me to. And that's a hard place to be in. And so I'm going to read what he wrote. He says, communicating educational goals and expectations should be done in a manner respectful of the student's own style and interest. College students need to pursue their own passions. Although parental input can be useful, children should not be expected to live out their parents' dreams. Focusing on my daughter the doctor, my son the lawyer is unproductive. This is a hard one, okay? And so college should be a time of self-discovery, even if the process is marked by some fits and some starts. Now, what do we mean by that? Meaning they may start out majoring in one thing and then deciding that they don't want to major in that. Hopefully you want to get them grounded early so they won't go back and forth with what they want to be in life. The next one is plan ahead. And so here, planning ahead is just thinking about how do you prepare yourself for actually coming to campus in the upcoming year. All the things they need to bring. And we give guidance in housing if they're all staying on campus, which they should be unless they're local. Housing gives items that are allowed to be in the residence hall and those things that are prohibited in terms of being. And so you plan ahead and all those things I talked about earlier. And then determine appropriate expectations and guidelines and be explicit. And so if you have standards and expectations, like you're going to check in with me X number of times. Now, I have heard parents give me a scope of things like, okay, you know, I talked to my son or daughter like 3 times during the course of a day. Okay, that's one parent's expectation. But we have some expectations that are a bit over the top. It shouldn't be the expectation that you're going to be responsible for for waking your child up to be at class. Part of this is their own journey. They need to be able to get up on their own and learn how to follow, their schedule themselves. It shouldn't be that. It should not be that. But I do know that it happens, that the parents serve as the alarm clock for their son or daughter. But that just shouldn't be the case, because part of them growing and developing and flourishing is the maturing that needs to take place to be responsible to get up on their own. You're not there to do that. You're to encourage them. You need to set your clock, but not be the clock for them. Does that make sense? That's hard too, I know, for some people, but it should set you free though. It really should. And so the next one is allow for mistakes. Now, this one is the place where you don't want to think about whether they actually will make a mistake. But there is a small percentage that's possible, that they can make a mistake. One of the biggest issues that we deal with in our office is underage drinking. College students getting here, experimenting with alcohol for the very first time, and then not knowing their drinking limits, okay? Not knowing their drinking limits. Now, I'm not saying that any of your children will actually engage in drinking alcohol. I'm just saying that there are going to be instances where we have some students that come here and experiment with alcohol. And so I'll tell you this story, and this has been about 6 years ago, I'm sure, because I know the student is gone from here now. But we had a 4.0 student who came here some years ago, and they actually went out and they had alcohol. And I was the person who had to respond to the emergency call. I had to call the parents at whatever time of morning it was. And so at this particular moment, the student was safe. They were at the hospital. We had staff with them, and they were not in any real danger. And so for the purposes of me not taking up too much time with the story, once I called the parents, they had to make a decision about whether they were going to come to the hospital in the wee hours of the morning to see about that particular student. They made the decision not to come. This is a rare moment now because, one, there were certain factors that we could eliminate. They weren't in any danger, and we had care on the scene with that particular student. They were disappointed at their 4.0 student. And they allowed that student to just not have to deal with them being in their face at that time of morning. And then they showed up the next morning by the time they had awakened and some of the alcohol had worn off, and they could have a normal conversation with that particular student. I tell you this story because it's one of those rare moments in my career where I got a letter from the student. She wrote a letter to every individual who cared for her that night, apologized for her behavior, and assured us that they would never do that again, and that's not how they were raised. And so those parents allowed for that mistake, but it also taught that student a lesson to not do that again or put herself or the family in that type of situation again. Rare moment in time, but allow for mistakes and then help them to learn and grow from it. But don't condone the behavior, okay? Because there is a difference. Okay, the impact of the students' move to college on parents. Again, it's a significant step towards adulthood. It's a symbolic end to childhood. This phase of life, especially when students move from home, and if this is your last one coming in, it's referred to as the empty nest. Is this an empty nest moment for? Okay, we have all right, okay. So, that can be hard. How do you feel? Any thoughts?
Sad a little bit. But
Sad a little bit. That's legitimate. Yeah, same thought. Okay, that makes sense. And so challenges for parents include feeling a void, feeling left out, and then relinquishing control. Now, the relinquishing control I'll talk about just for a split second, because you've been able to control their time, their schedule, everything about what they do, and you're not going to be able to do that anymore because of the freedom they get when they get here. And so here are 6 tips for adjusting to your child going to college. So you can reassure your child that they will be fine on their own at college. And if you assure them that they'll be fine, you also need to assure them that you will be fine, okay? And then don't draw out the goodbyes. You all remember that movie, The Blind Side? How many of you seen The Blind Side? Everybody seen The Blind Side? You remember the scene in there where Sandra Bullock, she drops them off, everybody's out in the parking lot, and what does she do? What does she do?
Goes to the car.
She goes to the car. And why does she go to the car? She didn't want to have a long goodbye. Now that was for her emotional benefit, right? And so that being said, that's the same kind of concept here, is not drawing out the goodbyes, because it is so difficult. And sometimes students will worry about you. They'll worry about whether you're okay with them being there. And so it's very important to be able to make that adjustment. Then don't hover. You've heard the concept of helicopter parents, right? You all know what that means, right? And so this is the concept here about don't hover. And so that being said, you need to allow them to navigate college life. There are people in offices and in departments that are there to help. No one wakes up saying, we want to make your son or daughter's life miserable while they're here. We want them to stay in this environment, and we want them to be successful. And so the goal is give them the opportunity to be responsible for whatever they encounter. Misunderstandings, miscommunications, clarifications, asking questions. If things get too difficult, then of course you intervene, but give them a chance to at least start the process and not you start it for them, okay? And so the next one is focus your attention on other children living at home with you, if you have them at home. If you don't, then that doesn't apply to you. But then take the opportunity to do some deep cleaning of your college kids' room. Now, that's a little funny for some folks, because it doesn't mean that you're telling them that they're not going to have their room when they come home. But sometimes, you can repurpose the space at some point, particularly if you're an empty nester. And then the last one, and this is a really big part of the thriving. If you have a little more free time, and you should, because remember, you're rediscovering, your time and space, and redirecting your time and energy. If you have a little free time, do some things you've been wanting to do, but haven't been able to do in your life. And so you have invested a lot in them, gone to every event that you could go to, been at all of their activities, and now they're away at college. And surely there may be some things that you actually want to experience. Some empty nesters that I know are traveling, and they are not missing an opportunity to go places that they want to go, because they are not restricted, and they don't have to have extra people to feed while they're on the trip or house. Just saying. And so they're taking full advantage of this journey of being an empty nester. And so it's my understanding that you all will be writing letters to your son or daughter before you leave today. How many of you have already done that? Okay, a couple of you all have done it, and some of you all will be doing it later, because the letters will be available to you all over in the university center in the president's dining room, is what I understand. And so one of the writers in one of the articles that I was reading in preparing for this, he talked about the pieces and the components of a letter that may be important for you to share. The biggest thing is that you want to share your heart, whatever it is you're feeling about this transition, and what significance it means for you in this transition. But he talked about college is a privilege, and thinking about the unique opportunity that they are being afforded to be able to come to an institution like this. That's important to emphasize. And then being the best 4 years of your life, you're going to build relationships. If you get involved and do things, if your son or daughter gets involved and they engage in the life of this institution, then yes, it will be absolutely the best 4 years of their life. And if they take care of business and do all the academic expectations, no worries whatsoever. And so then, not squandering the opportunity and taking full advantage and not losing their way, as someone said earlier. And then the first week of college are a time like no other. Let me tell you, it is absolutely so much energy on our campus at the beginning of school. You're meeting new people, they're in their O groups, you're already in a group now, making friends with your class, and the students are at least, and so they're already building unique relationships. And then there are going to be opportunities to get involved in this, and it will be the most exciting time on this campus. And then things will level out, and they'll start trying to focus on their class schedules, all of those things. And so take advantage of building great relationships is what you want them to do. But you talk to them about living up to good expectations, even with those times being like no other, and building new relationships and being friends with new people. I already mentioned the drinking dilemma, knowing that they are exposed and will be exposed to that, unfortunately, and whether they're exposed to it from people who are in their age group or if they're exposed to it by someone who's of a legal age to drink. Drinking is a real issue on college campuses around the country. But set expectations now. Talk about, what does that mean? What do you want to say to them if they encounter that? And then being friends in high school was much easier. And so I think that's self-explanatory, because this year is a different kind of environment. People from all over the country and world are going to be here. Living with those who you love. In your house, they have lived with you because you love them and you brought them into the world. They're going to have to build those relationships with people here in this community. And then, do not fool yourself. I was 18 and making the point that, you can't pull the wool over of your parents' eyes, and just emphasizing that you know what it's like to be 18 and all the things that are possible. And then think about it. Times are very different now than it was then. And the last one, and this one is from me because this one is very important to me, is remembering who you are and where you came from. I always have said that I never wanted to do anything to embarrass my family or bring shame upon my family because of something I did. And so I always strive to represent my family well and to represent the name that I carry. I keep Wilson in my name for a purpose because it is my family name. And I am proud of it, and I always want to make them proud. But I am married to a Murphy, and I also equally want to make him proud and do nothing that will bring shame. And that is the same thing that I tell students when I have these one-on-one moments with them, where I want them to think about, what would it mean to your family to know that you are here in this particular situation, particularly when it's not a good one. And so that being said, I firmly believe with everything in me that you all can thrive and you can flourish alongside your son or daughter as we pour into them and as you walk alongside them to go through this journey. And so thank you for your time and attention.